Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
No, we've done it, Rush Nation. We have finally entered fantasy football season. Week 1 is in the books, and I feel like week 2 is already smashing me around the proverbial workplace that is fantasy football. Big man, how are you? How was your week 1? Yes, the Buccaneers were fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Bucs are fantastic. On the whole, for fantasy, it was pretty good. A lot of the situations I kind of thought would happen. It's week 1, so you can't get carried away. You can't do a victory lap on those sorts of things. But I feel pretty good about some of the players we broke down and some of the players we thought would be big values ahead of ADP, reading the situations of those players and those coming through. Yeah, a few we got wrong. You're always going to get stuff wrong and things to look at and review. But I think the big takeaways for me for week 1 is there was a lot of panic. A lot of people got very cute with their lineups, and a lot of people made very, very simple mistakes. And a lot of that's the ring rust, right? You haven't played fantasy football for 9 months, 10 months or so. And I think some people made some critical errors from what I was seeing. And those that listen to the shows like this and those that back the advice that we had, I think on the whole, I got a lot of messages from people saying that they had very good week 1s. And again, you can't sort of rest on your laurels and like, oh, you had a really good week 1, you're on for a great season. In the same way that if you had a really bad week 1, it's all over. But unless you're the Carolina Panthers, then obviously that season is pretty much over. But I think, ultimately I feel pretty good. Definitely some good results in some of the best ball competitions that are around. Some of them published, some of them not. In those charity competitions. So, I feel pretty good about where I'm at and where my teams are at for the most part. You and I had a bit of a barnstormer in your home league.
We should put this into context. My team is in full rebuild, and Murf is the reigning champion. And I was expected to be steamrolled this week, which I would have taken because my team is built of sugarcane and chewing gum at this point. And I ran Murf to within a point, and the scoring itself, we were fairly up there within the league. So I was pleased. I could have done with George Kittle catching one more pass or the 49ers giving up a couple more points because that would have been fun. But Aaron Rodgers and the Jets weren't great, and the Niners were good. So a question for you on the Niners, Murph. We all had Christian McCaffrey as the 101. How many games does he have to miss for that 101 pick to be? Obviously, you can't take it back now, but just when does that 101 come back to the mean with the games missed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think a context is a really big thing to this. I think missing the early parts of the season as opposed to missing the critical points of the season are where the context is missed. Like, if I could sit here and say 3 games, but if you miss weeks 15, 16, and 17, then the 101 is irrelevant, right? Because that player you drafted to win you a league might have got you to the playoffs and then has gone completely missing. I think Dalvin Cook, whenever I think that, right, will get you to the playoffs and then just absolutely get hammered, injured, and disappear. And you're just like, well, thanks for that, Dalvin. When I need you, you're never there. And I famously over the years have talked about how I wouldn't draft Dalvin Cook for those reasons at his draft price. So I think ultimately it was a very late decision. And so Kyle Shanahan seems to think he's going to play next week. So I think really it's a bit of a moot theory conversation, but I think if he misses the first 3 games of the season, I still think you can recover from that situation if you can bag a win somewhere in those 3 games. You're probably okay if he goes for the rest of the season. But if it's the thing is this injury a injury that's going to prevent him from being the 101 in the sense of, is this something that's going to linger? Now, a better question would be, well, a similar sort of question would be around Puka Nacua. He was going tail end of the first round. He's now on IR. He will miss a minimum of 4 games. That is going to be very difficult for him to return the ADP that you drafted him at. And because that's 4 games minimum, maybe more. And on top of that, you then have his role getting diluted. So it's 4 games. Let's say he comes back on the 5th game. He then has a couple of games to the bye. So they're probably not going to give him full pelt. So he is ineffective now for about 6 weeks. And that becomes a much trickier proposition than the Christian McCaffrey situation. So I would say I'm not too worried. I'm sure Christian, it cost me a win. He probably cost a few people some wins this week. And that is unfortunately what it is. But I think the fact that it was such a late decision, I don't think is going to be a big issue long term. I think it's one of those things that he will be back next week.
When you say he cost you a win, did he cost you a win because you left him in with the possibility of him playing late, or did because you took him out and the points differential between who you replaced him with?
I don't know. I left him in the lineup. I fully believed he was going to play.
Did you, in that respect, then the new sleeper sub feature? Did you use that on him this week?
I won't use the new sleeper sub feature.
Okay,
but also, I won't use it because look, I think most people know my position on sleeper. I think it's a very buggy app. When they introduce new features, I am legitimately concerned. The fact this feature was dropped 2 weeks before the season says that they probably had some problems with this and that they've just launched it. So I did not want to use it in a league and watch it become an issue. They first launched it with this auto sub of you could select anybody, right? So regardless on whether someone's played or not played, I disagree with that premise completely. I think that takes an element of the skill out of fantasy football.
Yeah.
So I'm for the auto sub feature in the scenario of I had Jordan Mason on my bench and I could swap for Monday Night Football, or I had a Jets backup running back and I could have swapped in one of those players for Christian McCaffrey. That in that scenario, I'm probably okay with the auto sub as a rule. I don't like this idea of I can take Christian McCaffrey out and then all of a sudden I can bring in, let's say, J.K. Dobbins, who's had a monster week. I'm against that as a principle because effectively that means I don't have to make start-sit decisions. And
you're just best balling at that point. You're just individually best balling.
And I have an issue. So I don't have an issue if the game hasn't started, i.e. if this was a Sunday Night Football and you could bring in a Monday Night Football player, and especially in the UK, right, 1 a.m. lineup calls or 12 midnight lineup calls on work days is challenging. So I don't have a problem with that feature when it's working, and I haven't got it on in any. It's on in a league I'm in, but I'm not commissioning. But I'm not for it in a situation where I could retrospectively go back and use a player. Well, it's not retrospective because you're announcing it at the start of the week or whenever you are. But it takes the skill out for me because it means I can start Christian McCaffrey with 0 risk.
Yeah.
And I have a problem with that. Like, I think part of fantasy football is you have to weigh in those decisions.
Yeah. It should definitely be a 1-for-1. If this guy's down, you can bring in this player.
From that game or a game that hasn't kicked off. No,
100%.
So if it was like Sunday Night Football and you got the choice of the rest of the Sunday Night Football slate or the Monday Night Football slate, I'm for that. And Sleeper didn't put that in as an initial feature, and they have now. So you can do that. So if I was going to use this feature next year, and there's merits to it, that is an element I would consider using as long as it's not buggy. because I don't think takes the skill out, because you still have to make it. If it's a Monday night game, you still have to miss the majority of the slate. You've still had to have made a decision on that player.
Yeah.
So if,
essentially on a late night game for us Sunday night, Monday, you're essentially going to be using it if you have drafted their handcuff, aren't you? Because there are nobody other players left.
Yeah. Or if you have that person in the flex, there's an opportunity to use a wide receiver, etc. And you put them in the flex for that risk. And you would do that. And that element of it, I'm probably less okay with, but I'm fine with it. It is like you make your piece of it. But I don't know. I just think part of fantasy football is you've got to manage the injuries. And I think if you start someone that's injured, and part of this is from the FPL community of crave for this, because in FPL, you have an injured player, someone automatically comes off your bench. And I'm just like, well, it's less skillful for me.
Yeah.
I think you have a roster, you got to manage injuries, and you've got to make the calls on the information you have. And we shouldn't just always want it easy. And I like elements of skill over elements of luck. So that's where I sit with it. But I guess we'll see what happens with the season. But I think I'm not worried about Christian McCaffrey long term. I feel bad for Jesse Morse, the fantasy football doctor, from the injury experts. So he was in the Kings Classic against us this week, and both the auction and the snake. And I thought the snake team was really good, and I thought the auction team was really shit. But it's what it is. But he got put on auto and got Christian McCaffrey, so he was dead in the water. And he wasn't happy because he didn't want to draft Christian McCaffrey, but he was put in auto, and that kind of hampered his team. But he took the defeat gracefully. But he did lose to us twice this week, so that's that's one thing. But yeah, I think interesting game last night. I think a lot of people are going to rag on the Jets. I think they're going to be 3-1 in 3 weeks' time. So it's kind of a difficult thing, They've got, got the Titans, they've got the Broncos. I can't remember who else they've got in that slate. I think they're probably going to roll over the next three opponents. They've got a good defense. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is it anymore, but I don't think he was terrible. I think there were much worse quarterbacks this week, and there was a whole debate about quarterbacks this week and quarterback play. Arguably, this being one of the worst weeks of quarterback play we have seen in quite some time, in terms of the levels of passing, and some of the numbers to tight ends and wide receivers were quite shocking.
Yeah, statistically, I think the worst passing yards per team since 1991 in the NFL, something like that. 100 and I can't remember what the average across the NFL was this week. 121 or 160 something. It was really low.
It was sub 200. And I believe the only quarterback who threw for over 300 yards was Tua Tagovailoa. I think. I'm going to just double check that, but I'm fairly certain he was the only quarterback that threw for over 300 yards.
Here's a quick fire.
Matt Stafford did. I apologize. So him and Matt Stafford were the only quarterbacks to throw over 300 yards this week.
As Matt Stafford, I thought Matt Stafford looked good. Had a good command of that offense. I thought they were unlucky not to get the win against Detroit. Murph, quick fire quiz. Can you guess the Bengals records under Taylor in the first 2 weeks of the season? So, for instance, if they only played 2 games, so week 1 and week 2, what's their record currently? Bearing in mind there is week 2 to come.
Well, they always start badly. I mean, I can't think how many years Zach Taylor's been coached. I think this is his 5th year, right? So, am I right in thinking it's 9 games?
It's 11, so this is year 6.
I missed the season. Okay, so I reckon he's probably like, I think he's like 2-9, 3-8.
Yeah, they're 1-10 going into next week.
Yeah,
so bad. It's so bad.
They always start the season really badly. They always have started the season really badly. but this was a particularly new low for them. I think this is where I can't get on board with statements like, and I said this on the podcast on Monday, I believe. I can't get on the board the fact that Jamar Chase has handled this situation well and like a professional, because I don't believe he's left his teammates out to dry. And I understand that he's getting paid, like he's got to look after number one and his family, and I get that, but I don't blame him in the sense of he's trying to get paid, and this is a long protracted discussion. But we can't then also commend him because he has absolutely done over his team. And I just think I just have issue with this, and I have issue with this holdout situation. Now, CeeDee Lamb got paid and Dak Prescott got paid by Jerry Jones. How many times did you and I say, it's Jerry Jones' worst negotiated sports, you hold out long enough, he will pay you, it will be what it is. But the other teams aren't like that, and they're not like Jerry Jones, and they've absolutely held on. Brandon Ayuk got paid, 3 days before the season, and then he can't play a full count because he's not done any practice, and he drops the ball in the end zone because, hey, he's not done any practice.
It's ridiculous to me when you are an elite level talent at your possession. Go out and play football, you will get paid. Justin Jefferson didn't do any of this, and he got paid, right?
Part of it's franchises, part of it's images, and part of it's agents. Okay, so I think the difficult thing on it is that there seems to be this thing that you have to beat what everybody else is being paid. Mm-hmm. This is what I hate about it. It's not. I understand wanting positional value, right? So I understand that you want to be paid a premium amount of money, being one of the best in the world at your position, and therefore you want to get a paycheck that reflects that ability. I don't have a problem with this, but it's the ego thing on Jordan Love's a great example. I'm not saying it was Jordan Love that pushed this. I think it's more his agent, where he got like $100,000 more than Tua to beat Tua being the highest paid quarterback. And it's just like, when you're talking 240 million, is that $100,000 really the end all? But it probably isn't even guaranteed. He's probably never even going to see that $100,000.
Yeah.
But and that's where I think it's the agent. The agent's driven. I've got him the highest paid ever deal of this position of all time, and it just annoys me that it's a one-upmanship. They're your peers. They're your competition, but they're your peers. And I'm all for people wanting to earn money. I'm all for people wanting to get the absolute best deal for them. But to hold out a negotiation for an extra couple of $100,000 or $1 million or $2 million here for what appears to be the image of being the highest paid in your position, I just think is ludicrous. When I admire people like Tom Brady, who always took a below market rate because he wanted his teammates to get paid, because he cared more about winning. And he's like, do you know what? I back myself. We will win enough games that actually, whatever I make in my playing career, I'm going to make a hell of a lot more during it as an ambassador, as a model, or whatever. But I'm going to make a shitload for the next 30 years after I retire, because I'm going to be seen as one of the best players of all time. I appreciate not everyone could be the greatest player of all time. It's quite hard, but this is where, a precedent is set with certain players that they have to follow this and be the highest paid in the position, and that's why all this holdout has to happen. And yeah, I'm with you. I think people need to either get deals done sooner, and it's at a detriment of the team. And the Bengals have suffered from this situation because Higgins' situation, he's not been paid, and then he's a bit banged up, and Chase hasn't practiced, and all of a sudden you've got Yoshivas is your leading. I know Chase played, but he didn't play anywhere near to the level. And then Joe Burrow's thinking, I don't know who I'm throwing the ball to 3 hours before kickoff because of Chase is sick. It just doesn't do the team any good. And the Patriots are a team you should be beating. You should be beating them. So I'm. It's frustrating for Bengals fans because they're sitting there and they're the ones that pay for this. it's no one else. It's the Bengals fans because they deserve better. You've got an offense of Burrow and Chase and Higgins, and you've got Mike Gesicki, and you've got all these other sort of talents, and you're relying on what are you relying on? You're relying on Yoshua Burton doesn't even get a target in this game.
Yeah.
Like it's just a mess. And I feel for them. I feel for Bengals fans, and ultimately the Patriots had none of that. They didn't have any of this holdouts. They didn't have these people. You know, they had a team that played probably to near the best of their ability.
Yeah,
and that was good enough to win. And that is ultimately the difference. One team was ready, the other team wasn't, and in the NFL, if you're not ready, you get punished. So
a bit like yeah, that's a good segue to the rest of the teams this week that have performed pretty poorly. We've got the Panthers, the Giants. Who I'm missing? I'm drawing a blank on who else. Atlanta were pretty poor.
Yeah.
We've got the Green Bay situation where they look good, but Jordan Love is now out. So what do we do with them? There's the Browns. I mean, is Deshaun Washington or what? I mean, come on.
Well, I'll take all these situations individually. I'll start with Carolina, right? Actually, look, we've got a question in the chat. He's been waiting a few minutes, so let's answer this. Should I trade Mike Evans for Devontae Smith, Christian Kirk, Raheem Mostert, and Mark Andrews? That's a hard question to answer, because who are you going to drop? Like you're going to have to drop 3 players, and that's what kills the weight of the deal. Because if your 3 players are equal or better to what's there, then no.
Yeah.
Well, I'll get onto Raheem Mostert later. I wouldn't do that. I think you're trading the best player in the deal, and you've got some questionable figures going across back to you, depending on who you drop and how you roster. If it's a dynasty roster and it's weak, I don't necessarily advocate going for that deal either way. Yeah, without context, it's hard to kind of say. My gut says no, because you're going to have to drop 3 players. And I don't think you're getting a lot back to warrant what you're losing. Devonta Smith's not a bad piece. Christian Kirk could work, but yeah, it's a hard one without the context of all the rosters and scoring and everything else. But my gut in that initial instance probably says no. Carolina Panthers. I've always believed that the 32nd best team in the NFL would beat the best team in college, and I don't believe that now.
Do you genuinely think Georgia would roll Panthers at the moment?
Absolutely. I have no doubt. I have absolutely no doubt that the Georgia Bulldogs, as much as I don't like the Georgia Bulldogs, and anyone that knows me well enough, Tom Scott, knows how much I dislike the Georgia Bulldogs. But they would absolutely destroy the Carolina Panthers. They are a disorganized mess. I'm not a big Dave Canellis guy. I've talked on podcasts. I think he did okay in Tampa. I also think he took a lot of credit for a lot of things he didn't do. This whole I saved Geno Smith. This whole I saved Geno Smith and then I've saved Baker Mayfield is a load of hogwash. I think I text you saying that I believe he's a Saints-skin salesman because he absolutely has fallen upwards. He was passed over as the offensive coordinator in Seattle at least 3 times, maybe even 4. Gets 1 year as an offensive coordinator in Tampa and is now a head coach. What did he do in Tampa that got him that job? Well, he basically took the scheme, he stripped it all the way back and ran one of the most basic offensive schemes I've ever seen. He ran Rashad White up the gut several hundred times, and then he would look for Chris Godwin, and then he'd look for Mike Evans, and then Baker Mayfield would have to scramble. And he's lucky that Baker Mayfield has this awareness and ability to not get sacked. And that is basically what he did. And he did that, by the way, with no center. So it was like even more lunacy. They had no real variety in what he did. And I watched the Bucks on Sunday, and they're completely like a different team. It's ridiculous. And the Bucks weren't bad last year because they have good players, and it's amazing how good players can hide inefficiencies in the coaching game. He's going to strip back, and he has stripped back that Carolina offense to a basic scheme, which I think for Bryce Young probably makes a little bit of sense because he's struggling. But I worry about the coaching of Bryce Young. Now, Dave Canales is a quarterback coach, so you would like to think that he is coaching him. I'd like to know what they did all summer because I can't see any difference. And I feel bad. I actually feel bad for Bryce Young. I think it's really popular to say how poor Bryce Young is and how crap he is and how and all these things. I'd like to see what anyone else would do in that situation behind a porous offensive line, behind a fact that he's had 3 different coaches in 18 games. Like,
it's a tough start.
Well, you have Frank Reich, who I thought that will work brilliantly, but Frank Reich didn't want him and didn't believe in him, and he got sacked. So then they went with Steve, what's his face? Former Arizona coach, got fired after 1 year. Steve, defensive coach. No, he was a GM.
I was going to say he was at the Cardinals, though, right?
I have to look it up.
I'm out. I got nothing.
He was like literally a temporary coach. God, this is bothering me.
We'll find the answer. Come on. Google must be slow out in the country these days.
No, it's just giving me the current coaching staff.
Surely somebody in the chat knows.
Oh, it was. I was thinking Steve Wilkes, but it's not. It was Chris Tabor. Steve Wilkes was the last time there was an interim. So Chris Tabor. I mean, again, not a strong offensive-minded coach, and then I do think Steve Wilkes came in. But yeah, I mean, yeah. Oh, sorry, Wilkes did take over when Rule was fired. That's what I'm getting. Chris Tabor was a special teams coach. So again, he has a few months of Frank Reich. He gets sacked. He gets a special teams coach. He gets gone because he's an interim, and you get Dave Canales. Like, it's a real struggle when you've got no consistency. He's got no consistency. That offensive line is poor. He's got who's he got to throw the ball to? Adam Thielen, who's like 40.
Deontay
Johnson. But that's it. They've just drafted Xavier Legette, but last season he didn't have that. He had Adam Thielen and a bunch of guys, Jonathan Mingo, who isn't great. And the problem is, like, it's amazing how a good receiver will help a quarterback no end, and bookmark that for when we talk about Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals. He's struggling because he doesn't have a target. He doesn't have a big target to go to. He's got Deontay Johnson, who's one of the best catchers in the NFL in terms of he gets everything. But you can basically stick 2 guys on Deontay Johnson at all times, and then you've got nothing. And the problem is with Canales is his scheme is so lacking in variety that anyone who's seen him now from last year at the Buccaneers, it's a pretty easy offense to scheme against. And no offense, Chuba Hubbard is not Rashad White. And Deontay Johnson is a very good player, don't get me wrong, but he is not Mike Evans. And Adam Thielen is not Chris Godwin. So what happens is Bryce Young is not Baker Mayfield. So unfortunately, you've got a talent down in all these areas. When you have a basic scheme and none of these players can execute them to a great ability because the defense knows exactly what they're calling and how they're calling it, there's nowhere to go. And New Orleans is a great defense. I think the thing that worries me most about the Carolina Panthers, is they're up 30-0, the Saints, right before halftime, and they knock on the door of the red zone, the Panthers, and they're really close to the red zone. They've got 1 play left, and they're down 30-0 before the half. There's like 4 seconds left, and they kick a field goal. Now, tell me the logic of kicking a field goal. You go from 30-0 to 30-3. So you're still trailing by 4 scores. You theory could have 3 converted, 3 2-point conversion touchdowns and a field goal ties you.
Because they always roll in.
Because they always roll in. And I think for me, if you're a head coach in that situation, what you have just told your players is that you have effectively said to them that I'm more worried about the shutout and I don't expect you to score again than giving you the confidence to go for it. And I think if they go for it, even if they miss it, I think the players walk away from that situation thinking, our coach believes in us. He believes that we could score points. Yes, it's 30-0. Yes, we're getting whooped. But actually, the coach believes in us. He set us out there in a situation where most people would kick a field goal. And it would instill some belief. He kicks the field goal. If I'm an offensive player in that team, that says all my coach cares about is he doesn't believe that we're going to score many points today. And they didn't. And I just think that is such a poor message to send. You're down 30-0. The game is done at halftime. You might instill the greatest comeback of all time. But what if you score a touchdown in that situation? You go from 30-3 to 30-7. Now you're down 3 scores, not 4. If you get a stop and then you get the ball in the second half with a bit of momentum and confidence in you, the game could change. I'm not saying it would have done. It wouldn't have done. But you can inspire. You can see a spark. And I get that scoring from there is a 3 to 5% chance. It's not a big, high percentage play. But you've got to try. And I that was the part I just was like, Mr. Play It Safe Canelles is not going to help that team. The reason why CJ Stroud went on leaps and bounds last year, it wasn't all down to coaching. It was down to the preparation. They sent him out there and said, do you know what, CJ? Go throw the ball 50 times today. Go get used to being in the NFL. What happens, happens. We win, great. We lose, doesn't matter. Because we believe you're our guy. And we want to shorten that learning curve, but we want you to go out there with no pressure. It doesn't matter how you do. Just don't make the same mistake twice. Go get comfortable. Get yourself playing at this level because you're good enough and we believe in you. That's why we took you second overall.
Yeah.
And that's a different message to what, and I get Dave Canales doesn't draft Bryce Young, but that's the guy. You have left a job to go and be this guy's coach. So you have to coach him and you have to give him confidence. And I didn't see any confidence given to Bryce Young, and he didn't look very, very good. And time will tell. It's 1 week, but yeah, I think that's a tough situation for the Panthers. And as a result, you can't play any Panthers in your starting lineup. You just can't. You can't trust any of them. Even Deontay Johnson, he might be in PPR, a PPR monster in half decent lineups. In half decent matchups, he might dink you an 8 for 60, 70 yard stat line. And he might get you 15 points that way. And he might be the only one on the roster that you can consider. But you can't start Chuba Hubbard. You can't start Adam Thielen. You can't start Bryce Young. You can't start any of these guys. No. Jonathan Brooks, when he's back, we can see. But
even then, it could be risky.
Yeah, I mean, things might change. But, you know, we get into this business of thinking about rosters and roster management. If on your rosters you have Bryce Young and in a Superflex, maybe slightly different, and I hope you don't own him in the 1 QB league. But if you have Adam Thielen, you have Chuba Hubbard, these guys are pretty much almost droppable. Shouldn't be on your roster, Xavier Legette. In a dynasty league, fine. But in a redraft league, probably shouldn't be on a roster. These guys are not going to do it for you. Deontay Johnson's the only one I would hold. And that's only in PPR leagues. In a half-point PPR and a standard league, now you got to go. You got to go because you're not going to get enough out of him. Unfortunately, this offense is going to take far too long, and he is going to clog your roster. And you can't have people like that on your roster who are just going to clog and be a weight. You know, you got to look at your bench every week, and they've either got to be someone who's going to contribute to your starting lineup or someone like a Jordan Mason, where if a situation happens with the lead, he's going to be a highly effective fantasy football replacement.
Yep.
And
That segues nicely. That segues nicely into one of the brightest sparks from this week, and it's also a hold or sell question. We got a question from Moose99 coming in. He says, "Are you guys selling or holding J.K. Dobbins?" If you aren't aware, J.K. Dobbins went for 135 yards this week. Looked pretty good, I think. But this is a tough one, Murph, because Gus Edwards is still there. Nothing has happened to him. The Chargers said they were going to run the ball a lot, and they did run the ball a lot. But Gus Edwards is still there. Where are you right now on J.K. Dobbins?
I think he's a start. Are you selling or holding? It depends who's buying and what you're getting.
Yeah.
If you can tell me I'm going to get a productive player in return for J.K. Dobbins, I would consider taking it, but I think it would completely depend. That sounds like a cop-out, but I'm not in a desperation mode to hold J.K. Dobbins. If a good offer presents itself, someone who's needing a piece that needs J.K. Dobbins, then yeah, I'd be all for selling if you get something good in return. So look, I look at the names above. Okay, so let's take this. If someone offered me Christian Kirk for J.K. Dobbins, I'm taking that. If someone in the PPR league, especially, someone offers me Mark Andrews for J.K. Dobbins, I'm probably taking that unless I have a premium tight end. Someone offered me Devonta Smith for Dobbins, I'm snapping your hand off. I'll run to the moon. I can't imagine that would ever happen. I think the problem that you have with J.K. Dobbins is he has such a long-standing injury problem that he has always shown he's got this ability. He's always shown it. He's always shown that his yards per carry, I think he might be, I'm pretty sure, if you look at players over 250 carries in their career, he might be right up at the very top of players, especially most active players, in the terms of highest yards per carry. He's always had high yards per carry, but he's not durable. And that is the concern. And yeah, he absolutely blew it up in week one. There's no getting away from that. The context is they played a bad team. That helped. The context was they played in a game script that allowed them to run the ball that many times because they weren't trailing. That helped. And the other thing you've got to remember is that stat line is heavily massaged by 161-yard touchdown run.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the number of runs that he has a very high explosive run score. I think it's close to like 70-80% of explosive runs because of those plays that unfortunately it's kind of one of those that he did really, really well, but he did it he had 107 explosive run yards, and that's rushing yards and runs that go for over 15 yards. The next highest on this list is Josh Jacobs with 54. For context, Joe Mixon had none. Jordan Mason
he did have. It's because he didn't need to.
No, he didn't. But my point is, it's kind of when you get a severe outlier like that. Yeah, 80% of his yards were explosive run yards, which is just when you have that kind of situation, it's kind of don't buy into it too much. It's an outlier. It's a statistical outlier. He had good yards per carry, good utilization, but he also had 50-50 utilization with Gus Edwards. They've kind of shown that they will just let the hot hand run it. What if Gus Edwards broke a 61-yard touchdown?
I'll give over.
That can happen. Like I just think I like J.K. Dobbins. I like him for this week. I would play him in a low-end flex kind of role. I think you should absolutely do that. But am I banking on him long-term for this productivity? No, because I either think he'll be injured or he will be in a 50-50 timeshare.
It's one of those things as well, when you get one of these weeks for the running back where with J.K. Dobbins, if you start shopping him to people, then they should be savvy enough to think, well, why are they offering me J.K. Dobbins week one?
Right.
and they're not going to want to pay you what you want. And it's only the people that are going to be offering you for J.K. Dobbins that you can seriously consider options for. And then, unless you are in a league where somebody absolutely desperately needs a running back, then
Which
perhaps...
there might be. There's some breaking news from Adam Schefter saying that it looks like there's a real strong possibility Christian McCaffrey will not play Sunday against the Vikings.
Ooh.
So there's a situation where you could manufacture it to someone who owns Christian McCaffrey and they need a temporary replacement. You might get a nice piece from them. The same way that you should be thinking about quarterbacks on your roster that you could flip to the Jordan Love owner.
Yes. Let's talk through Green Bay. What do you think's the outcome if they do start Malik Willis?
I'm folding everyone except for Josh Jacobs, and then I'm making Emmanuel Wilson a big ad this week.
Okay.
You can't listen. Malik Willis has played 6 games in the NFL. He started 1 game in the NFL, maybe 2. The guy
I think it's 3.
Okay. But the guy has lost. He lost a backup job to Mason Rudolph. That's the backup job to Mason Rudolph at the Titans. He wasn't even the Titans' backup. He was number 3.
Yeah.
Like, he was behind Levis and Mason Rudolph. Like, that's bad. That ain't good. Like, I'm sorry. That is not good. There is a reason why he got... I remember when people talked about Malik Willis going in the top 10 of the NFL draft. And I thought it was absolute madness. I thought if he goes in the top 10 of the NFL draft, the NFL's lost its mind. It's absolutely lost its mind. He is not good enough to be at that level. And he fell to the 3rd round. I was like, oh, he's a first-round player. He's fallen in the 3rd round. No, he's a 3rd-round player. And to be honest, they reached because it was the worst quarterback class we will ever see in the NFL.
Pop quiz, where did he... Where did Malik Willis go to college?
Oh, I can't remember.
He went to Liberty. He started 3 games for the Tennessee Titans in 2022, and in those 3 games he threw 3 interceptions.
Right. How many touchdowns?
0, and he averaged... Well, he threw 123 yards in 3 games. So,
and then to make matters worse, it's not even like the guy's been in camp all summer and has therefore learned the playbook, been around the guys, built a rapport, and all of a sudden they are, he's the backup, but hey, he's prepped and he's ready. No, he's been there 3 weeks. So he doesn't know the playbook, doesn't know the players. Like, they must be speaking to Ryan Tannehill. They must be. There must be a phone call going to Ryan Tannehill, and maybe Malik Willis starts in week 2 because they might not get that done in time, and they've got to assess him and put him through his paces, and he's got to come in and he's got to learn a few things. Fine. Until a competent quarterback comes in, you cannot start any of the wide receivers or tight ends on that roster. You cannot, because you've just said it. They don't score touchdowns. He's not scored an NFL touchdown. Maybe he did in relief, but he didn't in his starts, and he throws for 123 yards. What are you going to do with that? And it's not like they've got a true alpha. They have a unit of players who will all jump in and get bits and pieces.
No, he has not in relief, and he averages over 3 sacks a game when playing.
Right. So I just for me, I cannot see a situation where starting any of the Green Bay Packer wide receivers comes into any form of consideration, because for me, the best case scenario is a 550-1. That is the ceiling you're going to get from a player. And then you're going to have to figure out which one that is. because I don't
And even
necessarily
that
think it's
feels.
I don't think it's going to be Jane Reed. Jane Reed could potentially be a starter because of his rushing ability. So he could get end arounds and clever snaps and do those sorts of bits and break one like he did in Friday in Brazil. So if that happened, like he is someone, if I had to pick one to start, it would be him. But I will probably, I haven't done my rankings this week, but if he's inside my top 50, I'll be shocked. So I'm just not there with any of the Packers wide receivers. I just think I'm all in on Jacobs. Jacobs probably becomes a top 8 running back this week. And then Emmanuel Wilson probably, because they need someone to split the carries because they could run the ball 30, 40 times.
Yeah.
So I think that's the situation I'm at with Green Bay. I think you've got to fade them, unfortunately. Which is a shame. Jane Reed looked really good in week 1. He looked really explosive. But then Jane Reed has these patches where he looks really good, but he is a hyper efficient player, and that efficiency cannot continue. You know, he will have games where he won't be as efficient as he was on Friday night. And you'll have a Christian Watson game, and you'll have a Romeo Dobbs game, and you'll have a Dontavian Wicks game, and you know they've got a lot of talent in that room. So I just think you're best off just being out of that business, bench everyone, pick up a waiver wire this week. I'd look at someone like Demarcus Robinson and just start him ahead of those guys.
Love that. We've had a question come in. There you go. Nino Pina has said, "What's up, guys? Got a little trade question. Send it in, my friend Murph. The Arizona Cardinals. What are we saying?"
I think there's going to be some panic on. I think there's going to be some panic on our guy Marv Harrison Jr. I don't think you got to panic the same way that I wouldn't take him for exactly this reason. Here we go. No, we'll do the Cardinals chat and then we'll come to this question.
Yep.
So there is this panic on Marv Harrison Jr. I think that we said this enough times that you were betting on him to have the best rookie season of all time, and that's not happened. And
well, not yet.
I know, but now people have realised that might not happen. And I'm like, well, welcome to the party. The rest of us have been here quite a while, and we've already finished the hors d'oeuvres, and we're already topping up the beers because it was never going to be an overnight success. I don't know why people assumed he was going to break 100 yards in his first game. The bottom line is Kyler Murray has been one of the worst quarterbacks at throwing the deep ball since Nuke Hopkins left. When Nuke Hopkins was there, he was elite. Let's not go about it. He was one of the best in deep ball success rate. He is now, last season, he was bottom of the league. This season, it's not been great. Granted, it's one game, but his deep throw passing percentage at this moment in time is 9.7%, which is, you know, to put it in context, he's just behind Justin Fields, or just ahead of Justin Fields. You got guys like Josh Allen in there, and Patrick Mahomes and Baker Mayfield who have more control games and they didn't go deep. So it's not everything. But when you've got a weapon like Marvin Harrison Jr. and nothing else, you should be expecting the deep ball to come out a little bit more. What I will say is their offense looked probably better than advertised. James Conner looked good, which we kind of expected it would be. We knew that there wasn't going to be any Trey Benson behind him. I think that was pretty obvious that he was going to be heavily utilized. Greg Dortch looks like he can probably be a pretty decent weapon. Michael Wilson gets the touchdown. I think really we're at a very narrow tree here with Kyler Murray with his rushing ability, and he looked good on the ground yet again. He's always going to be a top 15 quarterback. James Conner looks like he's going to be a top 15 running back. And then you kind of just have to hope that Marvin Harrison comes along for the ride. And Trey McBride is going to be absolutely fine. His usage actually was better than expected. I thought it would drop off a bit. I think he had 9 targets. So I think the bottom line is Trey McBride's usage was good. And yeah, there's the memes about he missed a wide open Marvin Harrison Jr. They've not played together. It takes time. I think it's a narrow tree. I can see the appeal in having Dortch, but I don't think he's ever going to be better than a low-end flex play. Same with Michael Wilson. I think you're basically looking at those guys as good best ball players. Don't know how they transcend to redraft. I think it's Murray, Marv, it's going to be slow, unfortunately, but it will get there.
Yep.
Connor will be good, and McBride will be good, and that is really all you need to know about the Arizona Cardinals. We'll get to this question. After seeing the game this week, I'm a bit worried about the Giants situation might get even uglier. So just traded Neighbors for DJ thoughts. DJ Moore, any thoughts? Yeah, my initial thought is it's probably a good trade, but I don't think it's an amazing trade. I think you have DJ Moore got a little bit banged up. There's a bit more competition for targets. I worry about Caleb Williams throwing the deep ball, probably more than Danny Dimes. But I would say that Neighbors is the only bona fide target in that offense other than Wan'Dale Robinson. So I think they're not going to throw it to back. So I think you've thrown away. I guess what you've done is you've taken the safety, you've gone away with the safe play, and you've gone for the upside. Moore has all the upside and has that ability to be a top 20 wide receiver. Neighbors is going to be sort of at best sort of the low end wide receiver too, and he'll get there through volume. He won't get there with the high ceiling plays. So yeah, I don't know if this is dynasty or redraft. If it's redraft, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay. If it's dynasty, I probably would have stuck with Neighbors because I think that situation will only go up, and I think he's a pretty safe bet while he's there. So that's kind of where I sit with it. You?
Yeah. How bad does Daniel Jones have to get before they start somebody else?
Well, the someone else is Drew Lock.
Yay! Let's go, baby. I don't know if that's better or worse.
Well, I think the bottom line is the truth be told, it can't be long. The fact that after week one they're already fielding questions about Daniel Jones being benched. Now he will play in week 2. I actually think there is something to. Here we go. Yeah, it's redraft. Wide receivers were looking like Rice, Neighbors, Godwin, and Pickens, so shooting for the moon. Yeah, then with that, because you've got those safety players with Godwins and Pickens, then I do quite like that trade because whilst I think Godwin and Pickens will outperform ADP, and Rice obviously is a potentially high, low end wide receiver 1, but then you've got the ban. If he goes out of that room, you've got 2 really nice floor plays with some volume. But yeah, you had a lot of a similar type of player. You didn't have that showstopper. So I like that trade more now, knowing what you've got behind, knowing that you can potentially get those high wide receiver 1 weeks if Caleb and Moore can put it together.
Yeah. You must have heard the stat about Daniel Jones, but the fact that since his contract he's thrown more pick sixes than he has touchdowns is wild.
There's context. As always, there is context. It's 7 games.
But that doesn't...
No, it does. It does matter because, you look at that. If you paint that number without context, you think it's 18, 19 games. And it's not. It's 7. 7 is a small sample. I don't even think the 3 pick sixes are bad. I think it's more the fact he's only scored 2 touchdowns is bad.
No, that's awful.
And there's 8 interceptions in there as well. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not defending Daniel Jones in his play. My point is it's a sensationalist stat that looks worse than it is because he missed most of last season injured. And don't forget, in those 7 games, one of those, he tore his Achilles or whatever his injury was. Yeah. So that's in there. Like, it's one of those situations. The touchdown, the pick 6 on Sunday is one of the worst you will ever see. But he doesn't see him. That offensive line wasn't good. The defensive line was even worse. Like Kayvon Thibodeau didn't even get a tackle in that game.
Yeah,
didn't even get a tackle. I just think for me, there is a quarterback in Daniel Jones. Do I think he's elite? No. Do I think he's going to win a Super Bowl? No. Do I think he is at his best a starting quarterback in the NFL? Yeah, I probably do. I think he took them to the playoffs in 2022. Injuries and things have settled, and he's in a bad place. I don't think Drew Lock is the answer. In fact, for fantasy football, I don't want Drew Lock to come in, because if Drew Lock comes in, you might as well shut down Neighbors and everyone. Like, because then there's no hope. At least with Daniel Jones, you do have this flash of hope of, well, he can sling it. It might be ugly, but he can do it sometimes. And I just think from a fantasy football perspective, I would much rather have Daniel Jones in. And I think you've paid the guy. You might as well see what you got. Benching him after 1 week doesn't make any sense. Benching him after 2 weeks probably doesn't make any sense. I think you've got to give him a month. And then if you move to Drew Lock, you move to Drew Lock. You're basically saying you're out on him, and then you've lost all that money. And then it's what it is. But you're writing off the season at that point. And there is a quarterback in Daniel Jones. They paid him. There's something there that they like. And this coaching staff and this GM paid him. It's not like it was a different organization that paid him.
Yeah.
So there's something there they like. It's just they can't get it together, and they have a limited amount of time to do it. But unfortunately, he is in New York. Now, if he's in Tampa or he's in Arizona or Jacksonville, he's not getting talked about the way he's getting talked about. It's because he's in New York. And that is the unfortunateness of being a New York Giants quarterback. But it's not like they've had amazing quarterbacks over the last 30, 40 years. I know Eli won 2 rings, but that defense won 2 rings. He finished 118 in his career. His name is Manning. He's liked more because he's a Manning, and he does the Manning cast with his brother. But actually, he was a pretty average quarterback. Towards the end, he was awful.
Yeah.
So, I just, they haven't had great quarterback play for 30 years. What's a few more games to see if he's actually... But that situation is a hard one. I do think that there is a player in there that can get there, but I think it is going to take a little bit of time, unfortunately. And he might not get that time, and that might be the worst part of it all.
Yeah, no, agreed. Shout out to Nino. He appreciate that. He says, make sure to drop that like and follow. If you would all like to follow us and drop those likes, we do appreciate it. It helps us reach more people, and as we are a pod of the people, we would appreciate that greatly. And we've got one here from George Play 01, from Trey Brenton, Blake Coram, my boy Javonte Williams. Who should I drop for Buffy Irving, or Tank Bigsby? Well, it's definitely not Javonte, right? Because he is the lead back.
Lead back.
Don't you air quotes. That's why we do it on the video. Come and join us on YouTube. Hit the bell and subscribe, and you know where we are. Look, the other two are handcuffs, right, at this point. And this is a tough one, because it is handcuffs for handcuffs. It's
not tough for me.
Okay, go on. Drop the wisdom.
How many snaps did Blake Coram play on Sunday?
I don't know.
I'll give you a clue.
0.
It was less than 1. Yeah. 0.
That wasn't a clue.
He can go. He can go, right? You can cut him. He's nothing, right? He's nothing. He has absolutely no value on your depth chart, on your fantasy roster, until Kyren Williams gets injured. And that's the only reason you're holding him. Kyren Williams played all but 7 snaps.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, look, he is second in snap share behind Jonathan Taylor in the league. So you can cut Blake Coram because there's no role for him. There's nothing for him.
Okay, so let's finish the question. I'm assuming he would rather one or the other, or Bucky Irving.
Well, I would consider taking both, and I would potentially drop Trey Benson, because the problem with a handcuff role where there is no, because the fact you've got he's gone on to say McLaughlin had a fumble in the next series. He started with carries. Don't know if they trust Javonte. The problem is Javonte is the running back, as in the traditional north-south running back, and McLaughlin is the scat back, the third down back, the receiving back, and probably the 2-minute warning back. So the problem is, you have to, for Javonte Williams to hit his sort of mark, you have to think that the Broncos are going to win a lot of football games. And in all reality, they're not. The problem with dropping a player like Javonte Williams, though, is that he is going to have standalone fantasy value. So Blake Corum has 0 standalone fantasy value, has none, 0. He is a weight on your roster that is. It depends how deep and shallow your bench is. If you got 10 bench spots, you can probably roster someone like Blake Corum. If you got 5, you can't, because unless Kyron Williams gets injured in the next week or two, you're going to have to drop him anyway when the bye weeks start happening. Trey Benson's pretty much the same. There isn't anything there for Trey Benson. At least with Irving and Bigsby, Tank Bigsby had exactly the same amount of carries as
Travis
Etienne. Yeah. Doing exactly the same number of carries. He actually was better. He's more efficient. I don't know if that continues as a trend, but if he's getting 10 carries a game, he is a handcuff with standalone fantasy value. Bucky Irving is going to be a handcuff with standalone fantasy value. And both of those are on better offenses than Trey Benson.
Yeah.
They're not on a better offense than Blake Corum, but unfortunately, Blake Corum is not going to be a thing. He's behind Ronnie Blimbing Rivers. I'm not being funny. Ronnie Rivers had 7 stats. I think you can't drop Javonte Williams. As much as they would seem like there's some logic to it, you just can't. The other two, I think you could drop for Irving and Bigsby. Whether you get them both is a different question. If you ask me which one I would roster more, Bigsby makes... there is a pathway to where I think Bigsby... I can see ETN getting more likely to be injured than Rachaad White. The reason why is that his usage is higher. He's got a lot more tread on those tires. Everything points to him being a player who could be injured just through those peripheral numbers of usage. So the chance of Bigsby ascending into a solo role is higher than Irving, but I think Irving has more standalone value. He will be used like he was used on Sunday. He will get these plays where he will make 50, 60 yards. I can see him being used at the goal line or in the red zone. I can see him getting touchdowns. The problem is, I think, with Irving is I don't see a world where Rachaad White, because they're going to cap Rachaad White's usage, they're going to bring his usage right down this year to use Bucky Irving more. He doesn't have the same tread on his tires. So unless there's a freak injury, which you can always predict, it's much harder to see an injury pathway to Rachaad White for Bucky Irving to succeed than for Travis Etienne for Tank Bigsby to proceed. Whereas I would say Trey Benson of all of those probably has the best pathway because James Conner has a history of injuries. But even then, Arizona Cardinals are not going to be winning many football games. He is not as good as James Conner. We're not going to see him get the same kind of level of commitment as James Conner does if he upsends into that role. So I'd feel pretty good dropping Benson and Corum, and I would go with Irving and Bigsby, because I think when the bye weeks happen, you can stick either of those players in your lineup as a flex. And I would hold to Javonte to see what happens. But if there's a reluctance to drop Benson, I would get it. I do get it. I have no reluctance in dropping Blake Corum, like he can go, but I could see some more reluctance in dropping Trey Benson. And if there is, then I would have to look at the fact that you're going to hold Javonte to not do anything. I would have to go for the player who's going to score fantasy points now. And that to me is more likely to be Bucky Irving than it is to be Tank Bigsby. But I think Tank Bigsby has a more clearer path to a bigger role because I can see a more likely world that Travis Etienne gets injured over Rachaad White.
There you have it. In-depth analysis. Right, Murph, we've smashed through an hour's worth of time already. What else would you like to cover before we hit the jets on this, drop the anchors and head back to shore?
Okay, so I've got some stuff I've marked. I had so much more stuff that I could have gone through. So I'll probably have to bookmark some of this. I wanted to go through. I have access to the Fantasy Points data suite, which is just amazing. Oh, someone's just asked a question. Ramondre in the 2026 second or DK Metcalf in Dynasty? Yeah, DK Metcalf in Dynasty. Like, he's still a young player. That offense will get better. Ramondre looked great on Sunday. Of course he did. But Ramondre Stevenson's got realistically 2 or 3 years left in the NFL and has had a big injury in his career. A 2026 second You don't know where that's going to be. If you can tell me that's going to be in the front end of the second round and it's going to be likely to be a 201, 202, 203, then great. If it's going to be a 29, 210, 211, 212, that's a gamble pick. It's less likely to hit anything. So, yeah, I'd probably stick with DK. Unless you're trying to win now and you need that running back to get you to the title this year, then that does change the complex. Graham Barfield, the fantasy points data, I have access to this, and I saw Graham Barfield put this in a nice... I did have this saved, but mine was a lot more messy, so I'm going to use Graham Barfield's chart, but I had the same chart out. Jonathan Taylor had 95% of snaps, Kyron Williams 90% of snaps, Bijan Robinson 90% of snaps. He is probably the only player in Atlanta. We didn't even get to Atlanta. I'll say this. Kirk Cousins is wrecked. He's absolutely wrecked. He cannot throw the football. Nobody had more turnover-worthy throws than Kirk Cousins. If you look at performances back over the last 3 seasons, 15% of Kirk Cousins' throws were what's called a turnover-worthy throw. So basically 50% of the time he could have been turned over. That's how bad it was. And the problem with it is that they ran only 2 schemes, shotgun and pistol. When they were in pistol, they ran the football. When they were in shotgun, they passed the football. Very predictable. He didn't move. He didn't move out of the pocket. He can't move. He can't put weight on his front foot. He looked like a man, like a deer in headlights. He's not ready. It's absolutely baffling. So everyone's starting to say, well, look, why did they take Michael Penix Jr. where they paid Kirk Cousins? I think the maddening thing is, why have they paid Kirk Cousins? Because he doesn't look right. He doesn't look healthy. I almost think you need to shut him down. And I don't know if it's an ownership pressure thing that they feel like they need to wheel him out there. But either Michael Penix is the worst quarterback going, or they just don't think he's up to it, and therefore they think his confidence is going to be shot. Or, Kirk Cousins says something on Arthur Blank, because I can't think what else it is that they're wheeling him out there, because he's throwing on one leg. He can't plant his leg.
It is 100% if we put Penix out there and he balls out, there is no way we can then put him back in the box when Cousins is fit. And then they're scared. And then they're scared they look ridiculous on the deal they've done with Cousins.
Well, they don't, because they've got it. Look, case in point, the San Francisco 49ers traded 3 first-round draft picks for Trey Lance. He plays 8-9 games for the organization. They take Brock Purdy with Mr. Irrelevant, and now all of a sudden he's the starting quarterback, and took him to the NFC title and took him to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree.
It doesn't matter if you're winning. Winning covers a lot of things. If Michael Penix comes in and that organization wins and makes the playoffs, no one will care about Kirk Cousins being paid $100 million. Like, no one will care. It won't matter to them, 180 million or however much he's getting, because they're winning. They didn't know who they were going to get in the draft. So you could sell this as, we didn't know who we were going to get in the draft. We didn't know our guy was going to fall to us. We took an insurance policy, but actually we just like the kid. He's better. You could buy that argument. My worry is, you're going to wheel Kirk Cousins out there. He's either going to get himself completely wrecked and he's never going to play again. And then what message does that send to Penix? You're going to start a guy on one leg over me.
This is true.
That for me is a complete mismanagement. I have seen everything I need to see, to the point now where he did not throw a pass over 10 yards on Sunday. Didn't throw a pass over 10 yards. So that's Drake London dead. You can't start Drake London. If he can't throw the ball more than 10 yards, you can't start Drake London. So it's the Bijan Robinson and maybe Kyle Pitts will get a little bit, but not a lot. Show. I mean, the leading target receiver in that team was Ray McCloud. Like, that's a dereliction of duty. You've got Drake London, Kyle Pitts, who you paid high first-round draft picks for, and you have got Ray McCloud as your leading target receiver? What's wrong with you? Like, if this was Arthur Smith, there'd be memes of people like doing effigies and burning his like paper mache body or whatever it is that they would do. Like, If Arthur Smith was in charge on Sunday, they would have absolutely crucified him on Twitter. But because it's a new regime, it's like, okay. And you're like, it's not okay. It's not, like, it's awful. I am genuinely concerned about the Atlanta Falcons. I'm genuinely concerned about Drake London because I think what can he do if he's got a quarterback who can't throw the football? And that's not something that will go away in a week. It's not like he's going to roll up next week and be all of a sudden better.
Yeah.
So you're either going to have to bench him, or you're going to have to. Basically, Bijan looks like he could actually be value at his spot, believe it or not. And I think people are going to get to the right result for the wrong reasons with his draft price. But I just don't like that situation at all in Atlanta, and that's a really difficult one to come towards and think about. And I think you have to get to the point where you're like, you need to, if you're Drake London owner, you can't start him this week because there's no confidence that he. And look, people will say Pittsburgh, they were a great defense, and they TJ Watt, and he got up there. Yeah, he did, but Kirk Cousins is doing three-step drops. He can't throw the football. He can't do a 7-step drop.
Yep. Or
he can't get out of the pocket. He can't plant his leg and throw the football. So I'm a bit worried about Atlanta. If I'm truly honest, I think that's a severe area of concern for this team. So I think that's one thing I would say. What else have I got? So yeah, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, 81%, Pacheco 80%. I was surprised by that. I didn't think Pacheco would get that much, but clearly, did well there. Stevenson 79.7, Ford 72.5. So you don't need to worry about a second running back in Cleveland. It's going to be Jerome Ford's show. And then all this Bucky Irving talk, Rashad White still had 70% rushing snap share, so he was in a good spot. One thing about Breece Hall. So Breece Hall's usage over the last 8 games has been absolutely nuts. So trending his last 8 games, he has averaged 15.3 carries and 7.6 targets per game.
That feels like a lot.
Yeah, that's 23 touches a game.
Yeah, he's no Joe Mixon, though, is he?
Well, I think he does pretty well.
Yeah, that is an insane number of touches.
NFL tight ends combined for just under 1,100 receiving yards and just 5 receiving touchdowns in week 1. And that's the single week lowest total, according to Ian Hartis, of the past 5 seasons.
Wowzers.
So the tight end position is hard.
Yeah.
Really, really hard. And then I would say Fantasy Points have got this new metric. It's average separation score, right, for wide receivers. Do you want to take a guess who had the highest score this week?
Who's been in the weight room? Average separation score. Does that mean how much they separate from their corner per route run?
Yeah.
Xavier Worthy.
No.
Okay. Am I on the right train of thought here? With
no, not with the Chiefs. So there's a couple.
Tyreek Hill.
There's a couple of big names.
What about AD Mitchell? He was completely open on 2 plays.
He was number 1.
Yes. Come on.
AD Mitchell.
Vindicated myself.
AD Mitchell. Well, you pulled that out. AD Mitchell was number 1. Mike Evans number 2. George Pickens, who, by the way, I said on yesterday's show, might be the most underrated receiver in the NFL currently, because he once again puts up another great game, and he's got Justin Fields throwing him the football. Like, you look at what George Pickens has had throwing him the football.
Yeah, Kenny Two Gloves.
Yeah, he's had Kenny Two Gloves. He had Mitch Trubisky for a bit. He had who else did he have throwing the football? Was it Mason? Did they have Mason for a bit last? No, he didn't have Mason. Who did they have last year throwing the ball when they bench Pickett? I forgot who they bench Pickett for. Someone useless. Ultimately, my point is that he's a backup quarterback throwing him the football his entire career, and yet he's still putting up elite wide receiver one numbers. He might be the most underrated wide receiver in the NFL, outside of Chris Godwin, of course.
Fire those cannons. Well, Murph, that was an in-depth look at tiny segment of week one. As per usual, it got out off the rails, out of hand, and it was nice to have some people in the comments as well. There's loads of people watching, and we appreciate you diving in as always. How many more pods have you got going out this week, Murph?
One tomorrow, starts and sits. Thursday will be the matchup show, so that'll be where I go through every single player in my rankings that's fantasy relevant, and we'll talk about where I think they're going to rank. So get a lot of positive feedback for that show. It's hard show to do, but it's a good show. I like that one. And then we'll do Thursday night football, wrap up things to know ready for the weekend. The FCC round one video is out and the podcast is out for that. Sign-ups for the FFCC 25 are live. So if you haven't had a chance, there's over 100 people that have watched this, and thank you so much to those of you that have watched it already. If you are wondering about whether you're in round two or in the Squid Game, the video will tell you that. We'll also tell you the prompt for the Squid Game. If you don't know what any of this means, then sign up will be in the link to the pod and also to the video. Sign up for the craziness that is the FFCC 2025. It's our charity fantasy football competition. We had 324 this year. We're looking for 516 next year.
Because why not?
Right. 512 next year. So sign up now, guarantee a spot. It's one competition that turns into three. So eventually we start with a pool, and then they'll turn into the main event, which is the World Championship, the Intercontinental Plate, which is like a lucky loser's cup. If you lose in week one, then you get the opportunity to still play on. And then for those that don't fit into either of those competitions, there is the Squid Game, which is basically a to survive, you've got to beat a randomized prompt, which is spun on a wheel. So this week spun out. I'm not going to say what it is because I want people to watch the video. But it's a pretty easy one for week one. It landed kindly to it could have been. I didn't think any of them were particularly outrageous, but there were some that were going to cull the numbers a bit more than others. But this one, I expect most teams to fall over the line quite easily. I will say it probably was the easiest prompt in there.
I played Mason, our Cali King, and he scored 95 points from his kickers, which is ludicrous.
Yeah, Chris Boswell set the FFCC record with a ridiculous 70 points he scored this week in the FFCC with his 6 field goals.
It's wild. It's the Wild West out there, and I don't understand. I understand none of it. I just know I'm into round 2. Happy days.
Yeah, you're into round 2, so
which has never happened before.
No, because you're in the plate last year. So yeah, you're into round 2. But that's because normally it's a head-to-head matchup to start, whereas this time the majority of the field got into round 2. So the top 256 out of the 324 got into. You
didn't have to do me like that, Murph. You could have just said congratulations.
I had to a little bit, but congratulations. You and I were very close in scoring. I think we were separated by about 6 points. And you were in. Listen, what I will say is statistically, with what you scored, you were likely to have won your head-to-head matchup. Although if you did draw Mason, you would have been out. But that's not how it would have worked with the draw, because it would have been a different draw to what was in the app. So let's just say you would have got through on your own merits to round 2, and congratulations. And you've got a good matchup this week. Do you know who you're playing?
I'm playing Cheesy somebody or other.
All right.
I can't remember your full name, Cheesy. I apologise, but I'm coming for you because I'm into round 3. Is it 2 week now from now on? Or are we going 2 weeks?
1 week this week.
What? That's all I need. So, just the 1 week. Cheesy, you're going down.
And then it's 2 weeks moving onwards from here.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. I'm making round 3 Stocks is finally coming for the FFCC. Murf, this has been a whole lot of fun, my friend. Enjoy the pods for the rest of the week. Week 2 is coming, Rush Nation. Make sure you are prepped and ready. The big man is dropping you knowledge like it's hot. That's going to do it for today's show. As always, don't forget, keep rushing.